This is the morning brief from the Economic Times.
Imagine yourself sitting in the cozy confines of your living room, surrounded by family and friends, people you like. Spirits are high, spirits flow freely. In your hand, you hold a glass of the finest 12-year-old Glenlivet single malt. You're savoring the light, smooth texture of the whiskey. Your senses are full of oak, orchard fruits, vanilla flan when
ड्यूटी फ्री से लिया क्या?
that one friend,
Nana, this is from my local wine shop close by.
अरे वाह, बड़े लोग must have paid a bomb. 5,000 rupees at least.
Hey, no, yeah, it's cheaper than just 4,000.
Whoa.
And guess how much this bottle of Shivas was for?
4,000?
No, 1,000 rupees less. Now, guess the price of this bottle of 100 Pipers Deluxe.
Where are you getting these mad discounts of 20% from here in Bombay?
Arey, no special discount. This is all MRP.
this could be a real conversation a year down the line. And yes, you may get your favorite bottle of premium whiskey cheaper than you have in the last many years. The two people to thank would be Boris Johnson and Narendra Modi. A pact between the UK and India that has been talked about for the last 10 years may finally happen now. How will this change the way India drinks? Listen on. It's the 3rd of May. From the Economic Times, I'm Anirban Chowdhury, and you're listening to Will Boris Johnson Change the Way India Drinks? On the Morning Brief. So, UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson visited India last week. He went to Ahmedabad, posed with Mahatma Gandhi's charkha, or the traditional spinning wheel, a symbol of India's struggle for freedom from the British. He also smiled at cameras while seated on a bulldozer. And among other matters of cross-country commerce, Johnson spoke to PM Modi about how to make scotch cheaper in India. Specifically, they spoke about a free trade agreement that, among other things, will cut India's high import taxes on scotch.
First of all, the tariff on whiskey is a tough one. I think if we could fix that, but there are all sorts of things that need to be addressed. I think but there are big opportunities, and we can get it done. And the firm message has gone out from our friends to make progress.
The proposed FTA has several important aspects, such as incentives to textile industries in India and easier visas for Indian professionals in the UK. But the tax cut on scotch is obviously the biggest attention grabber. After all, scotch accounts for 80% of India's food and beverage imports from the UK.
I'm personally euphoric. Never before has there been this level of a buzz and actual talks and discussions at multiple levels concerning specifically the UK FTA. This is what I think we've all been wanting for a very long time. And there is a lot of anticipation and positive note, I must say.
That's Keshav Prakash, founder of The Vault, a boutique importer of high-end spirits. While the talks have been on for a decade, Keshav is more optimistic this time.
I believe that this is likely to happen this time, and we should see an announcement around Diwali, because there is never before has there been, so much of a buzz. And with the UK Prime Minister visiting India recently, having talks and multiple ministerial level talks and non-government level talks that have been going on, means there is some amount of seriousness.
What also helps is the precedent set by a similar agreement between Australia and India. That pact, among other things, proposes to cut customs duties on wines imported from Australia. The pact has been announced, but is yet to be implemented. India right now charges a customs duty or import tax of 150% on foreign liquor. Now, this is really high, the highest in the world. China, for instance, levies a customs duty of 5%, Thailand of 60%. South Korea does not levy any tax, and neither does the UK. So Johnson's proposal to Modi
is to halve the duty immediately on signing the FTA from the 150% currently to 75%. And then progressively over a 3, 4, 5-year period, bring it down to a resting rate of, say, 30%.
That was Suresh Menon, an omniscient veteran of the spirits industry. He was for 3 decades with United Breweries and United Spirits, the second largest spirits company in the world. He now heads the International Spirits and Wines Association of India, an industry body. Now, very simply put, the proposed tax cuts Suresh is talking about would translate into a price drop of up to 20% on imported scotch. So, which brands would become cheaper, you ask? Well, quite a few. So, the most expensive ones that are bottled in Scotland and flown to India, these include
blended whiskies like Johnnie Walker Black, Johnnie Walker Red, Chivas Regal, Valentine's, the single malts like Glenfiddich, Glenmorangie, Singleton, etc.
And the scotch that comes to India in bulk, in casks, in 500-liter bottles, and even containers. Bottled in India and sold under brands like
Black Dog, VAT 69, Black and White, 100 Pipers, Teachers, William Lawson's, Devers.
Now, small teaspoons of this imported scotch are also blended into locally produced whiskey, called the Indian-made foreign liquor. This is done to enhance their flavor. So these are brands like Antiquity Blue, Royal Stag, Bagpiper, and McDowell. This segment is massive, and the teaspoons actually add up to a huge 80% of the total imported scotch. But the amount of scotch per bottle is so small that there is unlikely to be a significant price cut on these brands. This game is clearly about high-end, premium imported scotch. So why is the UK trying to get India drunk on its expensive liquor? For that, it's important to understand this market and its shifting trends. India is the world's largest consumer of whiskey by volume. But in terms of value, it's way behind and a fraction of developed markets. For instance, Scotch imports account for just 2% of our whiskey consumption. Indians have traditionally been consumers of cheap liquor. More than half of IMFL whiskey brands are made from molasses, not grain, as is the norm abroad. And hence the joke, your whiskey is rum. But that is now changing. A younger, more aspirational, more aware generation is coming of legal drinking age. They want to try out new forms of alcohol, the best brands from across the world. They would pay the extra buck for them and revel in the brag value of opening a bottle of Lefroy or Talisker in front of their friends. The trend was accelerated during the COVID-19 pandemic. While the pandemic and lockdowns wiped out a fifth of the country's whiskey sales volumes, they also interestingly pushed the sales of premium brands as people spent more money on having a good time at home. Keshav tells me this.
I think overall, we're seeing the consumption and behavior, like I said, is so evolving at a much faster rate than the industry. For example, pre-COVID, our business was predominantly between bars, restaurants, what we call on-trade, and incoming travel passengers into Mumbai International Airport, which is duty-free. COVID got that business down to zero for a very, very long time. But something interesting and surprising happened. We were never a retail brand, pre-COVID because retailers never understood us. And, we did not have access to a D2C market. We were of a price brackets that was way higher than normal. Our single malts were upwards of 12,000 plus. Our gins was upward of 9,000 plus rupees, correct? And overall, this was our average price point. Retailers was like, these are too expensive and brands we've never heard of. Sorry, we can't really afford to invest in these stocks. But come COVID, we started getting calls from these retailers And they were like, listen, boss, naya kya hai? Correct? That's what is being asked. I think what really, if I were to sit and analyze, happened is, sadly it took a COVID to change. And this serendipity was because I think people paused their time to discover.
So now this change in consumption pattern has also shifted the focus of Indian companies away from the bagpipers and McDowell's to the 100 Pipers and Chivas Regal. 5 years ago, premium whiskey brands were 40% of the total market. Now, they are 70%. Companies that used to sell a few 100,000 cases of these brands are now selling 15 million cases a year. Meanwhile, the government's tight control on prices and the incidence of high taxes has made sales of the cheaper brands unsustainable. So, companies do not want to play the volume game anymore. Premiumization is their focus now, says Suresh.
With the kind of restrictions that state governments, in a bid to enhance their own taxation, what they are placing on the alcohol industry, it becomes necessary for industry to kind of nudge people up the value chain through premiumization, where even with the lower volumes, per case earnings are higher, leading to an overall growth for the industry.
Now, price controls and domestic tax regulations are fragmented, complex, and frankly, pretty oppressive. In fact, in the current GST regime, which implements one centralized goods and services tax across the country, alcohol is one of 4 segments where taxes and prices are strictly controlled by the state governments. The others are petroleum, electricity, and stamp duty on real estate. Second to petroleum, alcohol is the biggest tax revenue earner for states.
And with the increasing costs and the increasing deficits arising out of those costs in state budgets, there has been increased taxation in the states on the alcoholic beverage industry. Some of it got rolled back subsequently, but a lot of it continues to stick in one name or the other.
And these taxes are excise duty and sales tax or value-added tax.
So on average, about 2/3 to 3/4, so that's about 66 to 75% of what the consumer pays goes to the government. Now, what happens is that by way of the government's attempts to enhance its share of the consumer rupee, it is constantly attempting to squeeze out the other stakeholders who are vying for their share. I mean, they want, for example, prices to be the lowest nationally. They're constantly looking over their shoulder and saying, what price did you sell your product at anywhere in the country in the last year? It has no record for the hyperinflation that is affecting the industry. Today, newspapers are constantly reporting that FMCG has taken 2-3 price increases over the last year for its products. In alcoholic beverages, the industry doesn't take a price increase. It is granted a price increase by the government.
Basically, the state governments are reluctant to allow companies to increase the base price, but will keep hiking taxes and tariffs. This helps them to take a larger share of what the consumer is paying while the company's margins get squeezed. Also, the state levies are extremely disparate. Ever wondered why prices of alcohol are so prohibitively expensive in Mumbai and dirt cheap in Gurgaon?
In Maharashtra, if the supplier bills the wholesaler at X, the consumer, because of the taxation levels, ultimately ends up paying 7 times X. So if I bill at 100, the consumer will end up paying 700. On the other hand, in Haryana, that state follows a model of what I would call, kind of easy taxation governance, or probably, to use a stronger word, lazy taxation governance, in the sense that it accepts commitments at the beginning of the fiscal period of what should be the revenue from a certain territory. It can either fix that itself, or it can probably do it by way of an auction bid. And thereafter, it collects that revenue every month from the trade. It has no linkage to the actual volumes being sold or the business being done in that territory.
So that leads to different prices for the same brand in different territories within Haryana, from Gurgaon to Faridabad to Ambala. Prices are cut and raised at will. Now you know why they begin Delhi, send your friend to Gurgaon to grab a bottle of single malt. Same for the people in Mumbai who fill their bags with bottles of liquor at the end of every Goa trip. And remember, in case of imported alcohol, these state taxes are mostly levied after customs duty is added. So there is a compounding effect. So from the time a 12-year-old bottle of Glenmorangie travels from its distillery in Scotland to a retail outlet in suburban Mumbai, a customs duty of 150%, an excise duty of another 150%, a value-added tax of 40%, and other logistics costs increases its price by 11 times. In this highly fragmented tax regime, an imported tax cut across the board would be a welcome change. Separately, it would increase competition. Cheaper scotch would have a massive advantage over its American and Japanese rivals, a Jack Daniels or a Yamazaki. Keshav agrees.
This will definitely create a huge price difference between Scottish whiskey and bourbon, for example. The import of Japanese whiskey is tiny, minuscule, and Japanese spirits anyway are under the novelty bracket, correct? And they already price themselves way out of the market currently. But, being Suntory has a significant presence here, and I think they're trying to be as competitive as possible. But yes, this will create a disparity. This will create more competition.
Which could mean that
every other major country exporting spirits to India will follow suit.
So you see similar FTAs happening between other countries and India as well.
I think Europe has been trying to create an FTA, they have been engaging with India for at least a decade, if not more.
All that said, the implementation of the UK-India FTA and its impact are still some distance away. Also, there are uncertainties. For instance, what if there is a price band outside of which the tax cut is not applicable? This would mean zero price cuts on the most expensive brands, which is a huge loss for sellers and buyers. Also, the state governments may see this benefit as an excuse to push more charges and tariffs, basically, in effect, mopping up the benefits that the center is giving. And lastly, Suresh says that the FTA does not mean that supplies and availability of scotch will suddenly increase.
Scotch cannot be turned on and off like a tap. The definition of scotch necessarily mandates that it should have been matured in Scotland for a minimum period of 3 years. And it is not as if the world has enormous quantities of Scotch spirit maturing in Scotland. It costs money, it costs investment. So obviously it has been done. Whatever inventories have been built up on the basis of the planning and the forecasting that those companies have done. So if the FTA were to be signed on Diwali, as has been indicated by the two prime ministers, then the planning for that will start and the stocks will be available for import into India at the minimum after a period of 3 years.
India is gradually changing from a nation that drinks by the bottle to one that savors its peg. The tribe of connoisseurs is growing. The young generation wants its whiskey aged and is willing to pay the price. The Indian whiskey market is fast changing from a volume game to a value proposition. And the world is taking notice. An import tax cut will aid that change. Many complications remain, but if all goes well, as the chairman of Shiva's Brothers told my colleague Sagar Malviya in an interview, the question is not whether India will become the biggest market for scotch. The question is when. Cheers to that. You've been listening to Duties, Drinks and Dialogue on The Morning Brief. This episode was produced by Surbhi Modi from The Economic Times and Saundarya Jayachandran from Avaz. Sound editors, Indranil Bhattacharjee from The Economic Times, and Varun Kapahi from Avaz. Executive producer Arijit Barman. Special thanks to Sagar Malviya, our retail ace without whom the episode wouldn't have been possible. The Morning Brief airs every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Thank you for listening and have a great day. All clips used in this episode belong to their respective owners. Credits are given in the description.